Arrogant tourist insults the royal guard, instantly regrets it. The summer heat bore down on Washington, D.C., making the air thick and hazy. The National Mall was alive with movement, families strolled, tourists snapped pictures, and street vendors sold everything from ice-cold lemonade to miniature replicas of the Capitol. In front of the towering landmark stood a U.S. honor guard, motionless and unshaken by the chaos around him. His polished boots gleamed in the midday sun, his rifle held in perfect alignment, and his eyes remained locked straight ahead. He was more than a soldier, he was a symbol of discipline, tradition, and unwavering duty. Among the bustling tourists, Brad Walker, a 32-year-old from Florida, stood out like a sore thumb. His bright red tank top, which read, "I do what I want," clung to his sweat-dampened chest. His cargo shorts were wrinkled, and his oversized sneakers squeaked slightly with every step. A half-empty bottle of soda dangled from his hand, the condensation dripping onto the pavement. He wasn't here for history. He wasn't here for respect. He was here for a show. Brad glanced at the soldier, then at the crowd, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. He pulled out his phone, flipping the camera toward himself. "All right, guys," he said, his voice loud and cocky. "We're standing here in front of one of these statue dudes. Guards. Seriously, though, do they even move? Are they even real?" A few tourists chuckled uncomfortably, but most ignored him. The honor guard remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable, his focus unwavering. But Brad wasn't satisfied with silence. He craved a reaction. He took a step closer, waving his hand obnoxiously in front of the soldier's face. Nothing. No blink, no flinch, no acknowledgement whatsoever. "Come on, man. Give us a smile. You gotta be dying in this heat." Brad jeered, his voice dripping with amusement. Still, nothing. A few murmurs rose from the crowd. Margaret Reynolds, an elderly woman with silver hair neatly pinned back, sighed loudly. "No respect these days," she muttered under her breath. Brad ignored her. He was too caught up in his own arrogance, too convinced that he was the star of the show. But what he didn't realize was that he had already crossed the line, and he was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. Brad's confidence swelled as he saw a few scattered chuckles from the crowd. Encouraged by the attention, he stepped even closer to the honor guard, his phone still recording. "All right, let's really test this guy," Brad laughed, adjusting his sunglasses. "What if I just—" He reached out as if to tap the soldier's pristine uniform. A collective gasp rippled through the bystanders. Margaret Reynolds, the elderly woman who had been watching with disapproval, shook her head. "This is going too far," she muttered, gripping the strap of her purse tightly. But Brad didn't care. He turned to the crowd, waving his arms dramatically. "Come on, y'all. I paid taxes. Doesn't that mean I should get a little entertainment?" A few onlookers shifted uncomfortably, while others held up their phones, ready to capture whatever might happen next. The air was thick with tension. Some people whispered to each other, others simply watched in stunned silence. And then, Brad made his biggest mistake yet. With an exaggerated grin, he reached up toward the soldier's hat, acting as if he were about to snatch it off his head. In an instant, everything changed. The honor guard, who had remained a pillar of stone through every insult and provocation, suddenly moved. His polished boot slammed down on the pavement with a sharp clack, and he took one deliberate step forward, his rifle shifting slightly. His piercing gaze locked onto Brad, the intensity in his eyes sharp as a blade. "Step back," the soldier's voice boomed across the square. The sound hit Brad like a shockwave. The laughter in his throat died instantly. His smirk faltered. His sunglasses slid down his nose. For the first time, his cocky bravado cracked. The crowd froze, the air thick with stunned silence. Even the tourists who had been recording lowered their phones slightly, their hands shaking. Brad stumbled backward, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. His once confident posture crumbled as he held up his hands defensively. Whoa, chill, man. It was just a joke, he stammered, his voice no longer dripping with arrogance, but with panic. But the honor guard wasn't playing games. His stance remained firm, his expression unreadable. Brad had spent the last few minutes treating the soldier like an amusement park attraction. But now, as he stood before the imposing figure, a living symbol of duty, discipline, and history, he finally understood. This was no joke. And for the first time in his life, Brad felt small. The crowd remained silent, their eyes darting between Brad and the honor guard. The tension in the air was suffocating, thick like a storm waiting to break. Brad, who had moments ago strutted around like he owned the place, now stood frozen. His usual cocky grin had vanished, replaced by a look of growing unease. "I mean, come on, man, it's not that serious, right?" he muttered, forcing out a nervous chuckle. He took another small step backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. The honor guard did not flinch. He remained as still as ever, his face carved from stone. But the weight of his presence alone was enough to shake Brad's once unshakable confidence. The crowd, which had initially been entertained by Brad's antics, now shifted in their stance. Murmurs of disapproval spread through the square like wildfire. Margaret Reynolds, the elderly woman who had been watching with distaste, straightened her posture. "Disgraceful," she muttered loud enough for others to hear. A man in the crowd, his veteran's cap perched proudly on his head, narrowed his eyes at Brad. His hand tightened around the wooden cane he leaned on. "Do you even know what you're disrespecting, son?" he called out, his voice steady but sharp. Brad turned to face him, startled by the voice's strength. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The murmurs around him grew louder. This isn't a game. What was he thinking? Some people have no respect at all. Brad swallowed hard. The amusement in the crowd had vanished, replaced with something far worse, judgment. And then, before Brad could even process how quickly things had spiraled out of control, security arrived. 2 Capitol security officers, their Navy uniforms crisp and their movements precise, emerged from the sidelines. Their expressions were unreadable, but their presence alone was enough to send a bolt of panic through Brad's body. One of the officers, a broad-shouldered man with a firm stance, locked eyes with Brad. "Sir, step forward," he commanded, his voice professional, but firm. Brad instinctively stepped back instead, his pulse pounding. He turned his head, as if looking for an escape route, but the crowd had closed in. He was trapped. His heart hammered in his chest as reality finally hit him like a truck. This wasn't funny anymore. This wasn't a game. And for the first time in his life, Brad realized he wasn't in control. The world around Brad felt like it was closing in. The cheerful, buzzing atmosphere of the Capitol Square had shifted into something colder, heavier. The very crowd that had once laughed at his jokes now stared at him with a mix of judgment and disbelief. The security officer took another step forward, his gaze locked onto Brad like a predator sizing up its prey. "Sir, I won't ask again." "Step forward," the officer repeated, his tone sharper this time. Brad's breathing quickened. He could feel the weight of the moment crushing down on him, but his pride refused to let him give in so easily. All right, relax," he muttered, forcing out a half-hearted chuckle. He raised his hands in mock surrender. But no one was laughing anymore. The honor guard remained still, an unmovable force against the chaos Brad had created. His presence alone was a reminder of the very thing Brad had failed to respect: discipline, duty, and honor. "I didn't mean anything by it, man," Brad tried again, his voice lacking the confidence he had just moments ago. He wasn't joking anymore. The elderly veteran, the one who had spoken out against Brad earlier, stepped forward. His weathered face was filled with disappointment as he adjusted his worn-out veteran's cap. "You don't get it, do you, kid?" he said, his voice steady but filled with something unforgiving. Brad opened his mouth to speak, but the veteran cut him off. "This man isn't some performer for your entertainment. He stands here, unwavering, because he represents something bigger than you'll ever understand." The words hit Brad like a slap to the face. His throat tightened, and for the first time, he felt small. Then, with precise timing, the security officers stepped in. One reached for Brad's arm, his grip firm but professional. "You're done here," the officer said. "Let's go." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people nodded in approval, others whispered things Brad couldn't quite make out. He only knew one thing: he had lost. His face burned with humiliation as he was led away. No cheers. No laughter. Only the quiet shame of being the man who crossed the line. As the security officers escorted Brad away, the Capitol Square fell into an unnerving silence. The crowd, once entertained by his antics, now watched in quiet reflection. The laughter had died, replaced by a newfound respect for the honor guard and the discipline he embodied. Brad, his face flushed red, kept his head down as the officer led him away. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but regret and the weight of a moment he could never take back. The cameras that had once recorded him for amusement were now documenting his humiliation, and the realization sent a chill down his spine. Meanwhile, the honor guard resumed his position, as if nothing had happened. His face remained stoic, his stance unshaken, and his hand steadily gripping his rifle. He had endured mockery, taunts, and outright disrespect, yet his unwavering commitment to duty had triumphed over foolishness. Then, as if the air itself had shifted, the crowd began to clap. At first, it was a slow, uncertain applause, but within moments, the sound swelled into a thunderous ovation. It wasn't for Brad, it was for the soldier who never wavered, never retaliated, never gave in. The elderly veteran, the same man who had confronted Brad, gave a small, respectful nod to the soldier. He then turned to the young boy standing beside him, perhaps his grandson, who had watched the entire scene unfold. "This is what respect looks like," the veteran said softly, placing a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. The boy, wide-eyed with admiration, nodded. Nearby, a woman whispered to her husband, "I'll never look at these guards the same way again." The event had been more than just a public humiliation for Brad. It had become a lesson for everyone who witnessed it. By the time Brad was taken out of sight, the Capitol Square had returned to normal. But something was different. Tourists who had once casually snapped photos now stood a little straighter, speaking in hushed voices as they passed the honor guard. The soldier, as always, stood tall, a symbol of discipline, honor, and the unshakable strength of tradition. And Brad? He would leave that day with nothing but the bitter taste of regret and a lesson he would never forget. We want to hear from you. What do you think about this intense moment? Do you believe the honor guard handled the situation the right way? How do you feel about the tourist's actions? Was it just a joke, or did he cross the line? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about respect, discipline, and the importance of tradition. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help spread the message of respect for those who serve with honor.